Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's program, Zoom Depositions, the Good, the Bad, and the Unsettled. I'm Ala Policastro, Director of Education and Professional Development at Beverly Hills Bar Association, and today I'm delighted to introduce our speakers, Adam Carlson, Andy Schwartz, as well as our moderator, Kondo Diki Kongsar. Kondo is an associate attorney at Casper, Meadows, Schwartz Cook and represents plaintiffs in complex civil litigation involving wrongful death, catastrophic personal injury, and product liability. Kondo earned her law degree at UC College of Law San Francisco, where she was the co-founder of Law Empowerment and Access Project, which focuses on advocating accessibility to legal education to underrepresented minorities through diverse representation and mentorship to pursue higher education. I'm going to turn it over to her to introduce you to our speakers, Adam and Andy.
Okay, hello everyone. Hello everyone. I just wanted to introduce myself again. I'm Kondo. I'm going to be moderating today's CLE, and I have the honor of introducing our panelists. So, Mr. Adam Carlson works at Casper, Meadows, Schwartz Cook as a managing partner. He represents individuals in serious personal injury cases with an emphasis on spinal cord injuries, traumatic brain injuries, permanent disability claims, including those arising from product defects, dangerous premises, and construction site incidents. Adam has been a co-lead for multiple trial practice series programs and organized a learning by doing deposition course, and has also taught at or lectured at Berkeley Law School on negotiating a personal injury case. He's tried cases where all depositions in the cases were conducted in person and ones where they were all on Zoom. He also authored an article with the same title as his program for the Daily Journal, where the Beverly Hills Bar Association actually contacted him to put on this program. And Mr. Andy Schwartz is the recently retired founding partner of Casper, Meadows, Schwartz Cook. Andy began his career in the Contra Costa County Public Defender's Office and was certified by the California State Bar as a criminal law specialist in 1982. In 1979, along with the other founding partner, Stan Casper, they both founded Casper, Meadows, Schwartz Cook. In 2002, Andy was certified as a civil trial advocate by the National Board of Trial Advocates. He's a member of both the American College of Trial Lawyers and the American Board of Trial Advocates. He served as a judge pro tem in both Alameda and Contra Costa County and has tried numerous cases to verdict in both state and federal courts for more than 40 years. And with that, I'd like to pass it on to Adam to kind of briefly introduce the program and what it's going to be about.
Hi there, everyone. So I'll go over what this program is, and it is a balanced examination of benefits and drawbacks of Zoom depositions, which obviously are prevalent in our practice now, with there being a choice these days of in-person versus Zoom, and we're going to present both sides of it. It involves people who have a preference for one or the other. I prefer Zoom, and it's nice to have this conversation with Andy and his perspective because he has a preference for in-person. So benefits and drawbacks of Zoom depositions, a discussion about how remote depositions and the unique aspects of it in terms of strategy, case development, as well as issues of fairness with potential witness coaching. What this program today is not, it is not a step-by-step how-to or technical training for either in-person or Zoom depositions. Obviously, some of the how-tos will be touched on, but we're not going in depth about that. There's other programs out there that focus more on that, not focusing on the granular logistics of things, platform-specific issues. But so that's why we're here today. And it's been interesting, the response to my article. I feel like it's the first publication where someone other than my mother has had an interest in what I wrote, because a lot of lawyers have reached out with their stories. A lot of judges have read it and they've been curious about what I said. So it even led to the Beverly Hills Bars Association picking this up and thought that it had value for you all today. So welcome everyone and look forward to this conversation.
Awesome. So we're going to go ahead and get started on the CLE, and I'm going to ask the first question to Adam. Adam, what do you consider when choosing between a remote deposition, and why do you prefer remote as opposed to an in-person deposition?
Yeah, I think really big picture sort of helicopter view over the trees down below. I think two things really come to mind. And the first one is that I feel as though my performance is better. And what I'm talking about is sort of my dealing with my outline as it's going on through the deposition. I'm in my computer. I can type as fast as the person speaking. It's a changing outline. I'm copy pasting. I'm taking things and putting it in later in the outline. I hear a witness say something. I type it exactly. I can read it back to him and really stay in the moment with all that. And I'll talk more in depth about that later. The other, in terms of my performance being better, is I feel like there's so many benefits to online Zoom depositions with exhibits. And I think that if there's a lot of exhibits involved, or even not a lot of exhibits involved, it's a lot better through through Zoom. And lastly, I think that it's a lower stress event for me with not dealing with logistics as much. I'm going to talk a little bit more about some more of that later, but I feel like my performance is better. I sort of feel like I'm in this like command center in my office, like launching like impeachment bombs and loading up the artillery cannon with exhibits and firing them and annihilating the opponent, all from my gaming chair here. And I feel like in the comfort of my, own room, I'm just like, crushing the deposition. So I feel like my performance is better in the deposition. And the second thing, big picture, is I feel as though I get better content. It does relate, obviously to my performance being better. But I feel like sometimes I like to get witnesses relaxed. They sort of forget that this is like a real deal proceeding, and they kind of give up the goods in a sense because they're not on guard. And I like that. So those are the two big picture things that come to mind about why I prefer doing depositions on Zoom.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And Andy, the same question is for you, kind of looking at the big picture. Why do you prefer in-person depositions, and what are your considerations there?
Well, hi everybody. It's nice to be here. First of all, I understand how technology usually wins, and I fully understand that. And I'm not here to make the last stand for the baby boomers because I know that this is inevitable and it's happening. But on the other hand, anybody who's ever tried a case and who's visited the scene of an accident or the scene of an incident, rather, there's something that you learn from being there in person. It's not necessarily the same thing, but it's something. You get perspective, you get to see the people involved, you see where the streets cross, you see where the traffic lights are, where the witnesses may or may not have been standing. And you miss that when you don't do it in person. And I find, and I have found, that when you're in the room with an important witness, regardless of the impediments to getting there or getting him or her there, you're going to learn something, and you're not going to give your opponent an advantage by your not being there. And from my perspective, and I've done both because I've recently retired. I worked through the pandemic. I did two full-blown binding arbitrations all on Zoom. So I know what they both are like. But I also know that when you're doing things in person, there are things that you can gain that are unavailable when you're doing them online. And so from that perspective, Adam's done a million of these. His outcomes have been fantastic, but there is another side to it that I grew up with in this practice that I think that advantages are to be gained by being in the room with the person who you're deposing.
Thank you so much, Andy. Going back a little to your last answer, Adam, you mentioned the exhibits. I think that's a huge part of depositions, remote or in person. Can you expand a little more on how remote depositions are more efficient, and specifically with the exhibits, note taking, outlining your deposition?
Yeah, I think that it's kind of one of the biggest advantages, I think, when I'm thinking about a Zoom depositions is how you can handle exhibits. When you're preparing for an in-person deposition, you're dealing a lot with printing out these copies. If depending on the number of lawyers at the deposition, you have to print that many copies. Some depositions that I've done involve even like, almost over 1,000 pages of documents. And you have to bring binders to this deposition. And I'm spending all this time prepping this deposition, like putting stickies in these pages and stuff like that, rather than, crafting my outline, things like that. And there's also the unanticipated exhibit that comes up a lot with the witness. You're asking them questions, including even one of the first questions of a deposition: what documents have you reviewed? And they refer to a document you haven't printed out. Or in the questioning, they refer to a document. And if you're on Zoom, you can stay in the moment. You can literally pause, say, okay, that document. You can pause, go to the other part of your computer, get out the document. You can do a search in the document, Control F, find the content that they were looking for, slide it over into your exhibit on Zoom, pull it up on the screen, and then you ask a question about it. And you're in the moment, in the flow of the deposition. So they refer to this thing. You've had 6 or 7 questions and answers leading up to this moment of this exhibit, and you're in the flow, and it just happened. Compared to you're in this deposition in person, and they reference an exhibit. Now, you're not going to pause the deposition right there necessarily. You might if you think it's a big deal. But then during a break, you're getting it printed. Over a lunch break, you're getting it printed. Whatever it might be. You lose the moment where you were. It's really hard to get everyone back to that moment, the flow. And then you ask them a question. Well, don't you remember you said earlier this? And you can even, read it off of, the real-time court. It just, you lose that moment. So I like the ability to have these exhibits on Zoom. It's way stressful. It's too stressful dealing with these big binders and then the unanticipated exhibit that comes up inevitably during a lot of these depositions. So a consideration when thinking about Zoom versus in person might be for you, how many exhibits are involved? What kind of case is it? Because not every case is exhibit driven. Not every deponent is exhibit driven. And so if you have a witness who has less exhibits involved, or you have a contained sort of a number of exhibits there might be for the witness, that's one thing to consider. If it's going to be a document intensive witness with a lot of exhibits, if the case has a lot of exhibits, then maybe that's something you should consider.
Yeah, I think Adam's right. When these document heavy exhibit depositions, it may be better to do it on Zoom. And it's a lot of my cases don't have a lot of documents, but some of them did. And Adam makes a very good point. When it's document heavy, it's really sort of I'm a pain in the behind to carry around multiple binders that make sure everybody has them, make sure they're all marked properly and they're part of the record. On the other hand, I taught at Stanford at a trial advocacy program for one evening last fall. And a big part of the program that I was part of was how to introduce evidence at a deposition. So it cuts both ways. You have to know how to introduce the evidence at the deposition. But on the other hand, when there's multiple documents, I think Adam makes a real good point. It might be better under certain circumstances with certain witnesses, particularly those that are document heavy, to have it on Zoom, to have the documents recorded electronically, rather than bulky 6 or 7 binders of hundreds of pages of documents.
And kind of on the same topic of efficiency, what about note taking? What about outlining? What do you see the advantages and disadvantages of in person versus Zoom? Andy, we can start with you.
Yeah, well, it's really not a problem for me. Adam does it his way. I mean, when I took the bar exam, I think 5% of the people typed it. Now nobody types it. It's all on a computer, and we handwrote our bar exam. So I just learned a different way. So in terms of note taking for me in a non-electronic deposition, I just take notes. It's not an issue for me. I can keep up. There's a court reporter there present in the room. If you need something read back, it can be read back. You could do real time if you wanted to. It's more expensive. But note taking is not an issue for me, and but I think Adam feels differently about that.
Yeah, my like deposition outline on my Word document is just this like living, breathing, out of control document that is continually massaged and edited as the deposition is ongoing. I'm copy pasting. I have the document open, a Word document, and I put it right where the camera is. So I'm looking at the person. I mean, I'm actually looking at the Word, but they think I'm looking at them. And the top half is outline. The bottom half, I have split view. And so down below, I can scroll up and down the rest of my outline to find other things in there. If the witness says something I want to return to, I'll put it in that section later. Sometimes I'm then even on like, looking at things on Google. They say a word or term I haven't heard of. They're still answering, then I put that, bring that over. So this outline is I'm taking notes. I'm looking at the person, I'm typing along. I type every word they say because I can type that fast. And I just feel very comfortable that I'm going to make sure I hit all of my points. And then when they say something I want to return to or highlight, it comes back into the section where I have all the other questions. So it's a more flow of a deposition. You can return to issues and things like that, but you really want to stay in the moment with the witness and the questioning. You really want to capture the moment. And I find it hard to return to a moment. With the flow of the witness, things kind of change, maybe a break. They talk with counsel and counsel's like, it's not so great how you kind of were talking about that thing. And then the next time you come back around to it, it's a different conversation. I'm able to be in the moment. And you can be on your laptop in person. You can. But it is awful. I mean, it's just the feeling in the room. I have seen, from my perspective, it's awful. Maybe you do it. I don't mean to be judgmental. I don't think it's good. But I've seen lawyers take depositions on their laptops. And the whole time in this deposition, they're there typing and doing exactly what I was talking about doing, but I have it up where the camera is. And they're in there and they're doing what I'm doing. And it's just not a good look. It's just the whole feeling in the room is weird. And I feel self-conscious when I do it, when I'm looking over things like that. But the whole looking and find other exhibits and stuff, when you're on Zoom, it's sort of like socially accepted to kind of look off camera at times and not look directly at the person. And so I just I don't feel self-conscious about looking around my computer. So I just think this like living outline document starts off very robust and gets even bigger and grows on what the witness says.
Yeah, Adam, I'm sure you agree with this. I teach, when I do teach, the most important part of any deposition is listening to the answers. And so many people get stuck on their outline. They're not paying attention to what the answers are. And you've addressed this in what you previously said, Adam, and you make good points. I could do it my way, you do it your way, but I would just add that the most important part of any deposition is what the answer is, not what your question is, because the answer is going to lead to more questions. And if you want to do it on your laptop, that's fine. You want to do it in person with your own notes and not on your laptop, that's fine too. But just be prepared to be facile and mobile on your feet, because you don't always get the answers you expect. And your outline doesn't necessarily carry the day as much as the answers do. So I would just add that to what Adam says, which I'm sure he would agree with what I had to say.
Definitely, definitely. On speaking of being prepared, I will start with Adam. Is there a different way that you would prepare for a remote deposition versus an in-person deposition? I think this is especially important for newer attorneys like myself, knowing the differences. Do you prepare differently? Do you prepare the same? Could you speak on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the thing that comes to mind a lot is just like these exhibit things of how are you going to handle all these exhibits? And that's just a major part of the prep and getting it, getting all of that, situated. The outlining. So the outlining for me kind of gets to the point that Andy made. When I am in person, my outline is way more pared down, less written out specific questions, because I want to kind of be engaged with the witness. I mean, I'm there in person. I want to be engaged with the witness. I don't want to then look down and read an entire, phrase or sentence. It's more along the lines of like bullet points of issues. And then in the moment, capitalizing on what Andy says I agree with, which I do agree with what he said about being in the moment and hearing hearing the answer and then going with it based on, your outline and issues and subjects. But for me, when I do an outline for myself on the that I'm going to do a Zoom deposition, it does have a lot more written out, because I feel like I can be reading it as the witness is answering, and it has all that more written out, as opposed to like if I glance down at an outline. So that's kind of the difference in terms of preparing like the outline. But then, if the deposition is, not at your home turf, not at your office, you have to think about all the other things you have to prepare for, and just make sure that you're logistically set up, what you're going to do that morning, do all these things that are, not involved with the Zoom deposition.
And Andy, for you, how do you prepare for in-person versus remote depositions? Is it the same?
I think for me, it's pretty much the same. Like I said, I haven't taken a remote deposition I haven't taken a remote deposition for quite a while. I did it a lot during the pandemic, and I retired in 2024, and I haven't done a lot since then. But at the end of the day, you've always got to keep in mind, we're in the people business. We're trying to convince jurors, and we've got to talk to them. They're our friends, and we're going to get them on our side. And you have to be comfortable talking to people in person. And you don't have that component when you're taking depositions continuously remotely. You get comfortable talking to people face to face, doing face to face depositions. And I'm concerned, at least to some degree, that in certain circumstances you lose that. So I don't prepare differently, and I'm more than willing to take remote depositions under certain circumstances. You save money, you save time, and some depositions aren't as important as others. But ones that are crucial, like I said, I don't prepare differently, but I'm being more inclined to do them in person than remotely.
And I had a comment from the audience in regards to the Zoom or the remote versus live depositions. They said, "Isn't stress good? Aren't you going to need to deal with paper and people at trial? Isn't litigation a social event? And isn't an in-person messy depo great trial prep?" Do either of you have any comment to that?
Yeah.
Well, let me just tell, when I would teach trial practice, I tell people the most important thing is you don't spill water on your pants. So the answer is, yeah, it's very stressful. But the stress is good, and I concur with the questioner or the person who made the comment. Zoom depos are also stressful for different reasons, or for other reasons, or additional reasons. But you're right, the questioner. It is stressful, and thinking on your feet and being, able to think quickly is part of our job, and the part that we really like. It comes up in Zoom depots too, and Adam will talk to that. But I agree, it is stressful. And that's not bad. Part of handling stress is part of our job, and we like that part.
Yeah. I think depending on what the stress is, I don't like adding unnecessary stress in my life this exhibit stuff I'm thinking about is like so stressful when I prep for a deposition about getting that all together. If it's an away game, if I'm not having my home turf, I'm stressed around like, okay, parking, or where am I getting my morning breakfast? I'm adding all these things in. Some it's referred to, I guess, as decision fatigue. You want to limit your decisions. It's what it is, stress fatigue. And stress is good in a sense, and I think that raises the point of like younger attorneys. I do think that for younger attorneys with less courtroom and trial experience, there is a lot of value of doing the in-person depo because it is it's more similar to a hearing or trial than a Zoom deposition. It just is, with the anxiety that comes with it, with the in-person things, all that. So for younger attorneys who don't have as much trial experience, maybe you do want to experience that stress with just a deposition level. But in general, I'm trying to limit the stress in my life. I want to get a really good deposition. I'm low stress over here in my command center, like firing off impeachment missiles, and I'm chill. I go to sometimes I go to these, especially in a away game depo, getting through the exhibits and this whole thing at the end of the deposition, it's like, oh, it's over. Like, I need a massage after that, but not a Thai massage because those are stressful too. But when I do Zoom depositions in my office, I'm done. I was like, all right, I'm gonna have a snack and get right back in it. And then you're talking about sometimes you have a week with multiple depositions and you have all the stress fatigue after Monday and you have 4 more days of it. So I think, yeah, stress can be good, but what stress is it?
Let me pick up on a point that Adam just made, and we talked about this, the three of us getting ready for this webinar. Condo brought up, this point, and I think it's an excellent point. Younger lawyers really have to get out from behind their computer. I mean, Adam's been at it for quite some time. He's very experienced. This has a lot of success. Younger lawyers who have not taken a depo in person, haven't been to court. My favorite part of being a lawyer was going to court and trying cases. I liked winning them better than losing them, but it was great being in court and seeing other people. And so to your point, Adam, that you just made, that I agree with, if you're younger, get out from behind your computer. It's a great world out there. And it might be a little more stressful, but the whole point of this job is to connect with people and to help people and to convince people. And when you're always behind your computer, you're missing out on a real good part of what we're doing for a living, all of us.
So kind of along those lines, Andy, what do you think are the disadvantages and risks to a remote deposition?
Well, like I said, you miss out on a lot. I mean, some of my best friends, professionally at least, have been made from my opponents. I mean, I'm in ABOTA, I'm in American College of Trial Lawyers. They're very collegial organizations. And if we didn't agree, we'd always go to court and get it resolved by somebody else. But often, everybody knows, most cases don't get tried. I mean, I think less get tried now than when I was doing them, but I wasn't trying a case every week. I was trying a couple, 3 a year at the most. But I had relationships with my opposing counsel. We would go to lunch sometimes, not often, but we take a 10-minute recess and we talk. We're interacting face to face. I don't care what anybody says, it's not the same than talking on a Zoom. I could talk to Adam and you, Condo, now, but we had lunch together Friday or last week, and I see you often. You miss out on the relationship or going to court. I understand that hardly anybody goes to court anymore, which is a shame. I understand that most mediations now are done remotely. I think you're missing out and you're not as effective when you don't have a relationship with the opposing counsel. And sometimes, not often, but occasionally it's bad. And at least you know what a bad relationship is like. I mean, I got along with most of my opponents. There'd be an occasional opponent who wasn't. I teach civility for ABOTA, and I've taught it for the past 20 years. And it was a good part of my practice. I mean, you get along with other people. You meet people who you like, who have common interests, who have the same profession. Even though they're trying to win their case and they were really good, you still had a relationship with them. And you miss out on that when you're doing it remotely. I know Adam feels differently about that to some degree, but I think he might agree with part of what I had to say also.
I would say, Andy, I agree with a lot of what you had to say. And I've actually, Andy is my most impactful mentor in my career. I would love to have the success over his career for me. He's had incredible trial results, all from all those in-person depo trials that have resulted for him. And I think we've had so many back and forths with this issue. And it's great conversations to have. And I think that the leading factor weighing in favor of in-person is this interpersonal dynamic relationship with counsel. I've come to recognize that it is different. And having that relationship with opposing counsel goes such a long way for handling meet and confer issues, things like that, or to try and resolve the case and get the best outcome for your client. And I actually had a little bit of an epiphany when we were kind of having even more conversations last week. And what I realized was that I don't necessarily feel a difference with my relationship with opposing counsel on my end when I meet them in person. I've made friends over like Zoom hangouts over during COVID, and then I meet them in person. And I don't think that my relationship changed with them. I still have that, same connection. But looking back on it, I realized that these interpersonal dynamic relationships, they're two-way streets. And I think that I connected from the other person's perspective because they felt more connected to me. Perhaps it's a generational thing where older attorneys feel more of a connection with me when they've met me in person. But looking back on some of my cases, I'm like, you know what? That case did kind of turn after we met in court for the MSJ hearing, and our relationship was different. I didn't view him any differently, but he viewed me differently. He must have. And so that is a major consideration, that you get to know opposing counsel, and that is just massive in a case. And I recognize that to be a big disadvantage, even though you can chat with lawyers on Zoom after and before. Shaking someone's hand is massive. I recognize that. So I agree with a lot of what Andy says.
Also, just speaking as myself as a newer attorney, even though I've been in the Zoom world and this is my current world, I also appreciate that in-person relationship that you can cultivate, the rapport that you make in person versus Zoom. I think is really important. And then kind of moving forward, I really wanted to ask you guys, does the deponent, the person that you are deposing, does that factor into your decision to take their deposition remotely or in person, like PMQs, expert witnesses, or plaintiffs or defendants? And Andy, can we start with you?
Oh, yeah, the answer is of course. I mean, typically if you're doing a plaintiff's personal injury case, you want to depose the defendant unless liability is not an issue. But you still want to see who the defendant is. Is it a corporate defendant? Is it a person? How's the person going to react Listen, if the jury likes the defendant and you have a great case, it hurts your case if they like the defendant. You've got to know that, and you find out that better in person, I would think, than you do online or remotely. Experts, I would want to depose an expert in person. There were times during the pandemic when I couldn't, and I didn't. And like I said, I went to 2 hearings. One of them was a 3-day binding arbitration. It was very expert intensive, and I never deposed the experts, and I felt like I wanted to. The result was fine, but I still needed to depose them in person when I couldn't. I have a friend who was designated as an expert in a legal malpractice case in San Diego, and she was deposed remotely as an expert, and she loved it. She felt comfortable, she was relaxed, and she preferred that much more than she would have preferred, she told me, to be having to go somewhere to the lawyer's office, or in federal court, they would have to come to her. The case was in San Diego. So yeah, you definitely care who you're deposing. If it's a minimal consequential witness who's a 6-hour flight away, for a half hour, it's an easy call. But there's much more gray than that. I mean, that's a silly example that I just gave. But yeah, the answer to your question is an unequivocal yes. It matters, and there's a lot of nuances to it, and you got to decide. On the other hand, I've seen Adam take depositions in cases where I would have never deposed a person remotely, and he just did great, and the outcomes were great, and he got stuff that I don't know that I could have gotten in person. So it cuts both ways. But from my perspective, under the appropriate circumstances, in person is important.
And yeah, Adam, to you, does who the deponent is, factor into your decision?
Yeah, I mean, it's so it's so infrequent. I really want to do in person. It's so great that we have these diverging opinions and perspectives for you all today. But I mean, the first thing coming to mind again is the exhibits, and it's interesting. And this is, I agree with a lot of Andy's saying today, but I disagree on the expert one, because when experts are being deposed, they're individuals who have reviewed a ton of the file compared to a lot of other witnesses, right? And so with any of their opinions, you come, they share your expert file with you, and it's everything in the case. And if there's a lot of documents in the case, which a lot of mine do involve, maybe it's more particular to that, but they show up and they give in their opinions, and you ask a question, just an example, like, where did you find the evidence of this in the file? And they say, oh, well, it was in the deposition of this, or it was in this document, or it was in that document. And then you can stay in the moment. You can go over to your other side of your computer. You can pull it up. You can get it. You can get the deposition line. You can control F, look for the words. You bring it over. You pull it up on the screen. You ask the expert right then and there, okay, what about this supports your opinion? And that's massive to me, because their opinions ultimately have to flow back to the evidence in the case. All of the depositions, all of the documents, that's where it flows from. And so I get to really get granular on the exhibit part of it. So I guess the big thing for me is exhibit. I recognize that there are certain witnesses who credibility is more important for the outcome of the case than other witnesses. And that's a huge consideration, because how somebody does in person is going to be different than on Zoom. But the reason why my preference is still on Zoom is because I had a trial recently where all the depositions were on Zoom, and I don't feel like I really lost the ability to assess their credibility from all those Zoom depositions. I don't feel like they were different than what I thought they would be. What I did think when I was prepping for the trial was, man, my depositions are really good. I know what my case theme is. I know what I'm going to get, and I was able to execute it, and I had really good depositions to work with. So that's where like my mindset, comes from, is I think I get really good depositions online. My preference is that, but the witness, they don't have a lot of exhibits attached to them, then I would consider in person.
And then with the remote depositions, now we can record them all. Have you ever used a recording of a deposition at trial?
Yes.
I have too, but don't forget, you can also record live depositions, and we do that all the time. We videotape depositions all the time, and we often play it back. So you don't lose that by having it in person. We usually videotape our depositions. That's good for two reasons. You get the videotape for trial, and unruly lawyers who haven't taken my civility class, they calm down considerably when they're on video. So it's a good point, Condo, but it's available to both.
Yeah, the rules are the same. Video recorded deposition is a video recorded deposition. So the rules are the same. You can do a videotaped, video recorded Zoom deposition and play at a trial, the same as a in person.
And then the last question that I have for both of you before we move to, closing it out and getting to audience questions is, do have any ethical issues arise, whether you are in person or remote? And Adam, we can start with you.
Yeah, I did recently, and it was a deposition where the lawyer was in the same room as the deponent, and I was asking questions, and I thought I overheard something in the background. I didn't know what that was. And then it happened again. I was like, I think that this lawyer is coaching the witness. I do. I didn't want to make that accusation there. I didn't have the goods yet, but I do a lot of video. I'm an amateur filmmaker. I also make films for my cases and splice together deposition clips and all this. And so I got a hold of the video right away, and I went to the moments where I thought I heard something, and I enhanced the audio, and sure enough, verbatim, the lawyer was telling the witness what to say. And that was just so crazy that had happened. And then you think about times where, and I'm going to talk in a little bit, I'm going to get to a case that actually deals with this. about lawyers not being on camera in a Zoom deposition. So there's case law on this recent to go over, but that happened. And, obviously it's not going to happen in person because you can see the lawyer and all that. Something like that isn't going to happen. You might still get some witness coaching and things like that with objections, but that was unique to Zoom.
And Andy, have there been any ethical issues that have arisen in in-person depositions?
There always are, but Adam didn't say this, but that incident that he just described was a genesis for his article. Because I remember it specifically because you told me about it, Adam. I wasn't there. And that kind of stuff happens on Zoom. It doesn't happen in person. And that's another reason why you want to factor it in. Listen, most lawyers aren't dishonest. I've been doing this for a long time. And for the most part, it's a high quality group of people I've run into, both sides of the bar. But occasionally it's going to happen, and it's easier to get away with when you're on Zoom than when you're in person. And it's never a factor for me that I want to do something in person. This is less likely the witness is going to be coached. But on the other hand, if there is someone who wants to coach a witness, it's easier to do it on Zoom than it is in person.
Thank you so much. And then Adam, I'd like to pass it off to you to kind of give, your final remarks and a summary of the CLE before we take questions.
You want to talk about that case, Adam?
Yeah, I'm going to get to that in a sec. First, before I get to that case, I'm going to go through just a little refresher of key considerations for whether to do something, whether to do a deposition, Zoom or in person. I talked about it a lot. Obviously, exhibit management, what's the witness about? What's your comfort with exhibit management? Some people aren't comfortable with Zoom exhibits and electronic exhibits. Thinking about the witness comfort versus having control over them, things like that. Like Andy talked about, the witness might be more comfortable on Zoom, and whether that's good or bad, think about that for yourself. If you think it's more important to be in person to assess demeanor and credibility, which again goes to maybe which witness is this. Cost factors, obviously that's an easy one. You got to figure out what makes sense for where these things are, how much it costs to get there. Similarly, the scheduling efficiencies and overall workflow, if you can just do it for a Zoom deposition at 10 a.m. on a Monday, and then also do one at 2 p.m. the same day in the same case, depending on where people are, all those types of things you want to consider. What we talked about, the real-time workflow with the outline and notes and things like that. Professionalism, rapport with opposing counsel. You're going to likely end up with a better relationship with counsel if you're meeting them in person. Ethical concerns, witness coaching, again, deponent type, and then really a decision balance with all of these, right? And you figure out what's more important for you. Certainly young lawyers should try doing more in person. I think perhaps going forward, if this CLE has been of any value to you, maybe things you hadn't thought about before, and you've been doing primarily Zoom depositions, maybe try an in-person deposition is like down the road, and then think about these issues, and maybe you've sort of overlooked something. So hopefully we've brought some value in that regard, pointed out some things that maybe hadn't been on top of mind for making your decision about doing Zoom versus in person.
Yeah.
So
in-person depositions are a lot closer to a trial than a Zoom deposition. So if your hope is to be a trial lawyer, and I guess a lot of you who are attending this webinar do have that hope, you get a lot better preparation for trial being in the room with the witness than being on the video with the witness. And that's just one of the many factors. Like I said, I'm not here to make the last stand for the baby boomers. This is inevitable. What Adam's doing is great. But there are other factors that need to be considered, and one of them is that.
So this is there's a 2025 case. These are Italian names, Agnone contra Agnone versus Agnone. It was 2025, and the issue was there was a lawyer refusing to turn on their camera.
Adam, I can't hear you.
Can anyone hear me? Can you guys hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Sorry. See, if we were in person, this wouldn't happen.
Maybe you can try to share it again.
Can you hear me? Can you hear
Yep.
me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Counsel was refusing to turn on their camera during a remote deposition. Now, this is important. We're going to get to a little practice point of deposition notice explicitly stated counsel must be on camera. The defending attorney refused to put on the camera. The noticing attorney noted multiple times on the record that the witness was looking up before answering, suggesting coaching, repeatedly asked the attorney to turn on the camera, and they did not. The court issued sanctions for discovery abuse and frustrating the truth-seeking process. And this Court of Appeal upheld the discovery sanction. So this is a big case. Attorneys have their camera on, and I'll get to what the deposition notice specifically said in this case. But in case opposing counsel brings up, well, what about the California rule of court allowing telephonic appearance? Isn't this the same if I'm off camera? The Court of Appeal addressed that. Contrary to their contention, the rule cannot be read as a blanket authorization for a deponent's attorney to participate by audio-only means while physically present with his client under circumstance where the attorney could surreptitiously coach the deponent outside opposing counsel's view. So if you're dealing with this, just know that this case addresses that potential counterpoint. So getting to sort of the practice point, the language, the notice language in Agnone specified it was going to be by Zoom and stated that the witness, the deponent, and their counsel shall participate using their own computer equipped with the webcam and with the stable landline wired Ethernet connection to the internet. This latter part I don't know about, but just the having in the notice that the attorney should appear in their own camera, I think should be in all notices going forward for Zoom. And I think that, I think that there could still be changes that would be better going forward with rules of court. This stuff needs to make it into rules of court. Eventually, it's not there yet. It's just in that case. But I think there are actually some counties that are trying to adopt these rules of court. I think it does need to happen, and people that are in charge of those things, I don't know who does those things, but get these rules of court related to Zoom depositions so that we can have some guidance and clarity on what's appropriate conduct with simple things such as whether or not a webcam is on. I think that counsel should not be allowed to be in the same room with the deponent. I think that they should have to be in a separate room. But people smarter than me should think about that. Do you have a right to counsel that's present in the room with you during anything? I don't know the implications there. There's all kinds of stuff.
You want your client to be deposed when you're not in the room with him or her?
I mean, I do it now. Yeah, I absolutely.
Okay.
I
understand. Yeah.
So
I think from my perspective, I think that my client would feel more comfortable if I was sitting next to him or her. But
yeah. Anyway, that was an important case. Think about that language for your next Zoom notice.
Awesome. So we want to be mindful of everyone's time. We have about 10 minutes left for questions. So the first question is, for newer attorneys like myself, do either of you just have any general advice in considering when to take a deposition remotely versus in person? Just any advice for like preparing and things like that for newer attorneys that didn't experience the world before Zoom depositions took over and Zoom court hearings. So Adam, we can start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we've been talking about the value for a younger attorney to do in person, but also try both, check them out. I think that what might happen for people is ultimately they establish their preference personally, but with that, they should always carry forward, like being mindful that their way is not the only way. So I think that for younger attorneys, you should prep and do both. You should try the in-person for the reasons we talked about, and also do Zoom depositions, because you might find that you're doing a better deposition on Zoom for whatever reason for you, however it works. So try them both, but definitely, yeah.
Yeah, I think, and my answer to that question would just be, it's what we've been talking about. I mean, there's a million factors that go into it. Who's the witness? How far is the witness? How important is the witness? There's something to be gained from taking the in-person depo if you've never taken one before. And likewise, there's something to be gained from taking a Zoom depo if you've never taken that before. I mean, I learned all this stuff late in my career. I didn't really like it, but I learned it. And and Adam's proved that it can be extremely effective.
I agree. And I think that what's nice is that both of you have experienced in-person and Zoom depositions and were able to make those strategic decisions to determine what works best for you guys. And so I think that's something that newer attorneys can learn from, and to kind of possibly see a hybrid situation in the future. From the audience, Erica Williams is asking, how do you make the determination to take video recordings of your deposition? Or rather, what factors do you consider when making the determination to video record? Adam?
Well, I guess with my practice now, I video record them all, so it's just my default. I like having the video clip for a number of reasons. Like I mentioned, I do a bit of filmmaking, so having a video clip of a deponent saying something that I can splice into something, but I know that that's not everyone does those types of things. But I think ultimately, if you're gonna use it at trial, a transcript, it's better presentation to play the video of the person saying something inconsistent if it's an impeachment. If it's a party, then you can play their deposition. Essentially, you can state their deposition or play their deposition basically at any time throughout your trial. And obviously, seeing the person saying it from their own mouths as opposed to a lawyer rereading it, I think is more effective. So my default is to video record. But in terms of factors, costs, it's going to cost a little more. So does it justify it in the case?
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, it's obviously cost. I mean, if you can afford it and the case is worth it, you should spend the money to do it. It's always better to have a video than just a straight record.
And then Robert Aronoff asked, what are the rules and strategies when you and your opponent differ on Zoom or in person?
Yeah, my understanding is the noticing attorney gets to set what they want, and that you are allowed to notice a deposition by remote means. I've never had pushback on that, of noticing it remotely and then insisting on in person, or someone noticing it for in person and resisting that it be remote. But what can happen is if people can't make it in person, it's noticed for in person, then there's other means that they can appear. So there's a telephonic appearance. I've also had the ability to, I've had in-person depositions where they set up the Zoom capabilities, and sometimes that can be the court reporting service, or it can be working with opposing counsel, depending on how they're going to take the deposition. For example, I had counsel notice in person, and it was far away from where I was. He lived near where the deponent was, and he agreed to have him on a laptop and the other person on a laptop. They were in the same room. All of the other lawyers were on Zoom. He was in the room with the deponent, and we were all appearing remotely by Zoom.
And Shannon Burns is asking, in Zoom depos, how do you determine whether or not the deponent has a cheat sheet or is looking at documents outside the video to help in responding to potential questions? So this kind of goes to the witness coaching, I think.
Yeah. So I give an admonition, part of my admonitions, there's the deposition admonitions that you give, don't gas, we're entitled to the best estimate, recording rules, all that. I also give the admonition that they are not to refer to or review any documents off screen, and that we may ask at any point to view what's in the room and see what's there. If there is a document in the room, then you should turn it over. If you need to refer to it or look at it later on, you can let us know, but we are entitled to your testimony from what you recall, not from reviewing any document. Now, you can't fully, enforce that. There could be things off camera. And I have heard, one of the judges that reached out after the article came out told me a story about how, the person like bumped the laptop and it knocked it, and then saw like a giant whiteboard with like the bullet points for the deponent to make during the depo. And then they're like, ma'am, can you turn that thing around? And it was like a war room with all this stuff up there. So I just give an admonition at the beginning. It's just that, it's the best you can do. And it's a risk associated with doing a Zoom deposition. I acknowledge.
Yeah. And you got to remember this, they were all court officers. At least that's what I was told I was when I was sworn into the bar a while ago. And we have to have our integrity. And, you can't suspect that everybody's going to be dishonest. I sort of make the other presumption. And that people are going to be honest and have integrity. It's not always the case, but for the most part it is. And if things like that happen, they're going to happen. They're going to happen both in remote and in-person depots as well.
Sometimes kind of depending, I will say you may be subject to sanctions if we learn that you're using an aid, but it's not standard for me. Maybe I'll make it standard. I don't know. It kind of depends on how the case has been going.
And David Azar asked if you have used electronic exhibits with screens for an in-person deposition. And his impression is that some live exhibit companies have that as an option. Have you guys ever
I don't even know
worked
what
with
that means.
All the time, like just playing on a TV, I assume, yeah, or on a laptop all the time in person, yeah. We have a TV in our conference room and can load some things up because we have access to our computer database on our TV screen, and so I'll put it up there, or you can have it on your laptop or something, or and show it. So yeah, and that comes up. Like sometimes you're trying to drill down on like where on a map or something it occurred, like where they were standing at a scene. And on Zoom, what I do is I'll share screen, pull up Google Maps, go to the scene, and I'll click around and I'll kind of talk through, narrate for the record and say, okay, I want to drill down on where you were standing. And they're like, okay, were you on this corner? No, that corner, no. And then they give me the corner, I'll screenshot it, save that screenshot as a document, PDF, or make that an exhibit, and then load it up. And in person, might do something similar with the TV conference room, where I have Google Maps up and I'm scrolling around. Tell me where when I get to where you are, and then you screenshot it, and then you send that to a printer, print that out, and make it an exhibit. It becomes difficult when you're having this electronic stuff that's also, depending on which file it is, but that's just an example.
And then the last question before we hit 1:30 is from RJ Hendricks. How do you deal with a situation where, in a remote deposition, the witness produces additional documents?
You always find a way to get it. It happens if they have a lawyer, the lawyer will make do. They'll scan it. I've always ended up, when that happens, being able to get a digital copy of it and emailed and make it a part of the record. I suppose if it's someone who doesn't have fully those capabilities, it just would figure it out, make a way to set those aside.
We can recess the deposition and get the documents and come back some other day. That's not a problem.
Yeah, I've typically had the witness with a counsel. It's often with counsel, and counsel will get you the documents.
I've also seen like with PMQs where when you ask what documents have you reviewed in preparation and they give it to you right there. I've seen where attorneys have been like, let's take a 10-minute break so I can review this and then move along. And that's something that's advantageous in Zoom depositions, is you can quickly kind of go back and forth and add that later on to your outline as well. And I believe we're at the 1:30 mark. I'm sure people would like to leave that they could, but we have some more questions. I don't know, Adam and Andy, if you would like to answer them now or
Maybe
if
we
We
you'd
got a
like to
can
couple
reach
more
out.
minutes. A couple more minutes.
Yeah.
do a couple more minutes if people want to stay, but if not, and you're taking off, thank you for appearing. Hopefully this was of value to you and your consideration of doing Zoom or in person.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
So much. Okay, so then as people are leaving, I'll ask some more questions to you guys. One person, James Warren asked, do you ask the deponent if they have any other electronic devices present during the Zoom deposition?
I have not.
No.
No, I think no, I have not asked that.
Would bringing a thumb drive, this is from John Hawley, would bringing a thumb drive with exhibits be efficient in an in-person depo?
Sure.
Yeah, we get that a lot. You get that a lot. I've had certainly expert witnesses. They show up. You know, used to be kind of they're showing up with
Well,
their
now they
mind.
have to reduce their files a certain number of days
Yeah,
before
no,
the
that's true.
depo.
Yeah, the 3-day rule, that's good. But
Yeah,
you know, so it's you can bring a thumb drive with documents if you're asked,
Uh,
if the depot notice asks for documents.
mhm. Stuart Wolf asked, how do the rules work about recording a Zoom deposition? The general rule in California is you can't video or audio record without consent.
Uh, you notice it saying it's going to be video recorded, and then in the beginning, it says at the top says this meeting is being recorded, and yeah, everyone has to click OK. So that's the consent.
And Cedar Boscia, apologies if I mispronounced that. This was more on the line of the question that we had earlier about whether a deponent factors into your decision. Cedar asked, how does the question of in-person versus virtual depositions apply to expert depositions, and what should experts consider?
well, I think we talked about that already. I mean,
Mhm.
I prefer to depose experts in person. So you really get a feel for who they are. And you get there in state court, at least you get your files 72 hours in advance, I think, maybe 48. I forget the rule. And in California, they have to come to you. In federal court, you've got to go to them, so that's an issue. But I just prefer in person in general and for experts in particular. But that's just my preference, and I think Adam has a different one.
Yeah, I mean, God, it's just like those documents. All these experts are going to have like refer to some minute fact that is a foundation for something they're trying to use to crush your case. I want to make sure that I can drill down on that fact so then when they hit the stand, I'm like prepared to just know what's coming. Because
Mhm.
ultimately they can get up there and say what they want, but I think the jury understands when you rein everything back in and the foundation of what they said that is so good for their side is weak. And a deposition to me is discovery. You're
Mhm.
discovering and then with an expert, you're discovering what their opinions are and what they're based on. The best way to test that, I think, is being prepared to get into the documents.
That's great. Okay.
And another question, kind of on the topic of comfortability of the deponent, does that matter to either of you about how comfortable the deponent is during the deposition?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it matters. Some people like them comfortable, some people don't like them comfortable. It's a matter of personal preference. And I find that they're often less comfortable when they're in person than not, but some people prefer to have the witness more comfortable than others.
yeah, I think it's interesting. Annie and I both see one aspect of this the same, that the witness is more likely to be comfortable on Zoom than in person. They're likely to be uncomfortable in person. And we see, but we see it differently about how that plays out, what that means to us, because Andy prefers the in-person witness being a little uncomfortable and seizing on that and assessing them out and all that. And I think that what I've seen since I've started doing these Zoom depositions is these witnesses super comfortable just give up the goods. They just don't, they're not on guard and they slip. They're not thinking. They say ridiculous things because they're on Zoom in their own room. And I've liked that. And so we agree that they're probably more comfortable on Zoom. And you have to figure out, I think, with your practice. And also that's a style thing. Andy has a much different style with how he would do every trial than my style with all of my trials. Andy is stylistic. It's personal. I see how when Andy talks about how he likes the witness uncomfortable and asking him questions, how that's for Andy. But I also see like who I am and my vibe and what I like to do and how I approach people and converse and all that, that the Zoom comfort person for the witness is it's my style.
I think we're sort of at the end of our time limit here, Kondo.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you guys so much for speaking and answering all of our questions. There's a few questions left over, but I'm sure we can find a way to get us all connected.
Yeah, well, our email address is available to the participants. There must be.
I'm sure they are.
I'm sure we can make it so. Yeah.
Well, I don't know if anyone's going to come on and sign us out.
Alrighty, this concludes today's presentation. Thank you so much, Kondo, Adam, and Andy, for joining us today and educating our members. And thank you so much to our audience. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Have a
everyone.
great day.